Welcome back to another episode of the Empower Grief Journey podcast. I'm your host, Chris Mamone, and I'm an acceptance coach who helps people heal from grief, loss, and trauma to discover their self-acceptance and step into their personal power. This podcast is your dedicated space for healing, growth, and transformation. Each episode shares insightful and inspirational stories, along with practical tools and actionable insights that can help guide you along your healing journey. Today, I have a guest with us. Her name is Marie. She's a compassionate and dedicated RN who has been a nursing work in hospital acute care for over 30 years. Marie worked in adult and pediatric surgical hospital units and also in pediatric pre-surgery and pediatric home infusion and spent 16 years as a hospital supervisor and at a pediatric hospital. She also worked several years in hospice, and that's where she felt called to improve education in that area um, of hospice and end of life. Maria has created a podcast called Hospice Explained, a compelling podcast that explores the profound and complex experiences of end of life. Marie's aimed at demystifying the concept of hospice to foster a deeper understanding of its true meaning. And Marie also guides people through the philosophy, principles, and the process of symptom management during this significant phase of life. Marie, I want to welcome you onto the podcast.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you so much for having me.
And I know that for listeners, by the way, I was actually a guest on Maria's podcast about a month ago. Would you say?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
Yeah, and we had a really good conversation.
we
I was a
did.
guest on that, and that was my grief story and journey, which you guys have heard a lot. So I'm excited to bring Maria on the show for a couple reasons. Is that grief is something that does creep up on us when we're in that end of life stage of our lives, and it's a lot of anticipatory grief, a lot of uncertainty about what's going to happen, how it's going to happen, even how we're going to process our emotions and how we feel in that moment. There's a lot that goes on at that phase of life. And so I'm going to turn the mic over to Marie to share a little bit more about herself and also her experience working in hospice.
Well, thanks again, Chris, for having me. I'm going to own a little bit of nervousness because I am an audio only podcaster. So this is a little different for me. Well, so I have had a lot of personal experiences, unfortunately, with death and end of life. And I mean, maybe no more than average, but then you start looking into it. I think it's above average because my parents were older when they had me, so I went through both of their end of life, their siblings, I've had two brothers pass and because they were a chunk older than me. In addition, my husband's parents and like a couple of his aunts. So it just kind of lots of experience and so I ended up feeling drawn to work in the hospice field, but I found that after, a certain period of time that it just drained me too much and I just had to own that and that I couldn't come home and say, this was my day." And, just it just really emotionally pulled me down into a place that it was too hard to have a balance. And I had to really, that was hard. That was just hard to own that I wasn't doing well at balancing, the sorrows of work and just having regular life. So I ended up saying, what else can I do? What's next? And I found that when I was a hospice nurse, I did admissions a lot. So I was one of the first, not always the first person somebody saw, but I try to pour in all this education. There is so much to know when you don't know anything about how to take care of a dying person in your own home. And so I just kept going, this is what you got to do. This is what you got to do. And so then I thought, well, if I just did a podcast, it was like, this is my grandiose idea. I'll do 20 episodes and that's it. People know how to do hospice. And I've just, let me see here. Yeah, just recorded 150 episodes. So
Wow,
yeah.
congratulations to you.
Thank you.
Wow.
Some of them are repeats, some of them are repeats. And I've been doing this for 4 years. I did not do it weekly for a while. So coming into a weekly, it's up to my numbers. But yeah, I was like, nobody is more surprised than me that there's still more to talk about. Nobody. So there just is lots to
Well,
talk about.
well, it seems like your hospital experience, you've worked on both the side of bringing life into the world and
Yeah.
the way life goes out.
Yeah.
And that's got to be such a polarizing I'm trying to stumble on my words a little bit, but a polarizing experience for you to work on both ends of
It
life.
It is. It's so much of nursing can be like that. You know, you may work in just a surgical area where you don't see a lot of life or death changes happen, but I have seen a lot. And then, anytime you've been, you got the white hair, you've been in the season a while. So lots of experience comes with long years of doing that job. And the reality, some people like to switch jobs, and I have switched into multiple different departments over the years. And I currently work in something called pre-anesthesia, which is getting patients ready to go to surgery, which is actually, it sounds simple, but it's pretty complex. Lots of what we would call critical thinking that I have to work on, making sure these patients are physically safe to have surgery. And I work with anesthesia and their protocols to get folks ready, which is a little easier on my work life balance. And then, I can still podcast.
And I love that for you. And I've watched a few videos on social media from these anesthesiologists, and I personally I had no idea there was all this stuff that goes on behind the scenes with anesthesia because
It's a big
I,
deal.
I myself have gone under a couple times, and it's always, you get a needle in the arm and you're out cold in about 5 seconds kind of thing. But I
Right.
had no idea there was so much behind that about measuring vitals with people, how they look, how they're talking. Like there's so much that goes on behind the
Right.
scenes with that.
Oh, it's very detailed. If I have pages of protocol. If you have high blood pressure, we're going to do some an EKG and a blood test. If you have a pacemaker, we need to get a clearance letter from your doctor. If you have, it goes on and on. Lots of protocols.
So,
Make it safe.
I wanted to ask you, when you were working in hospice, I know you switched from another field at that point into hospice.
Hmm.
Was that a big shift going away from where you started to jumping into hospice? Was there a lot of different things you had to learn or grow
Yes.
as you were getting into that?
Absolutely. So I was in pediatrics. I was a hospital supervisor in pediatrics and doing home infusion. And I saw some death. I mean, it just happens, that you're going to see a certain amount of death in the hospital system because that's often where a lot of folks go to die. But in the pediatric world, it's less. Thankfully, it's less. But I go back, let's see, what year? So my dad died in 2006, so almost 20 years ago, and I had him pass at my house. And it was a great experience as, if you want to call somebody's death and dying a great experience, but it really taught me a lot. My mom had died my mom had died 10 years prior, and we did that at my sister's house. And so multiple experiences, I thought, I just really love what the nurses do for hospice, and I really want to try it. And so I got into it, and I did. I loved it. Of course I loved it. I I found that it's 100% different because you're training people in the hospital. You're telling people, hey, turn on this light if if their numbers are going, if something's changing, if you got concerns, call me, call me, call me, call me. In hospice, it's similar. Call me. You got problems, call me. We want to talk it through. A lot of it's more over the phone because you're in a remote location, but it's it's different because you're trying to train somebody to allow natural death. That's what hospice is all about. It's allowing natural death. We're not trying to speed up or slow down the process. We're just trying to come alongside and help the patient and family know what's going on and make it a peaceful experience. And for a lot of people it does become that peaceful experience, but it can cause a lot of angst and grief and fear. There's no limit to all the feelings we feel, right?
There's really not. And one of the reasons I was excited to talk to you is when I watched my grandfather pass away, I had no idea what that situation was. We didn't really have hospice, if you will. We just let everything happen naturally at
Hmm.
home. And but I just didn't understand the process, which is why I was really excited to talk to you because, when you're going through watching somebody at that end stage of life, that's the one and only time I've done that. You
Hmm.
just don't know what to expect. And so
No.
I wanted to pick your brain on that a little bit as a nurse in that field. Were you dealing with a lot of family members that were going through that anticipatory grief and people that just didn't understand the process, or maybe I know it's probably a very highly emotional situation too, because that's what I experienced.
Well, so
Or-
that's a that's a really good question. I think because so let me give you a little more information. My parents were 44 and 47 when I was born. So my siblings were ages 14 to 21 when I was born. So my siblings are a chunk older. So my parents ended up passing. My siblings are all at least 50. I was age 30 and 40 when my parents died. So my siblings had also experienced life and experienced deaths, and they were, I think all of them were grandparents even when my dad died. I don't know about when my mom died, but so my siblings were able to talk to their children, and they were. And what happens is when you have older families that, as we all age, your family ages, then you may have had more experiences. And we were a large family. I come from 5 kids. So my parents both had good sized, decent sized families. So experiences have happened. So what were we when so pause here. How do I say this? As a nurse, both my sisters happen to be nurses. They work in like mother baby. They don't work in like surgical and where I have a little bit wider experience. So they also know symptoms. So they can tell and we can have great discussions. So what happens when, like, for example, both parents died, it's like this is happening, and so then you disseminate that out to the rest of the family. So it was probably more of a calm and peaceful experience than what you might guess, because I'm telling my kids, my sisters and brothers are telling their kids, this is what's happening. And we just gathered a lot. I can tell you that's what happened a lot.
Hmm.
My dad was at my house for 6 weeks, and somebody was at the house visiting, every few days. Cousins, his sister came. I think, can't remember, his other sister wasn't able to come, but you know how it goes. His brothers had passed at the time he died. And we just, had something going in the kitchen, and you visit downstairs, you visit upstairs, and just kind of focused on knowing these are our last weeks with dad. He had a cancer diagnosis. He was given a couple months to live, and he was emotionally and spiritually ready to go. In fact, I was trying to, I talk about it multiple times. I was trying to feed him, Daddy, Daddy, don't, because I wanted to enjoy and savor him for longer. And he was ready to go. He was just ready. He had been without my mom for 10 years. Perfect example. He told one of my brothers, I hope this doesn't take long. I remember being horrified. I still have a hard time hearing that, but as the older I get it. He had been without, my mom and dad were married 53 years, and he had been without her 10 years, and he missed her. He missed her a lot. And sorry, I'm just gonna take a drink.
Yeah, you're fine. I wanted to ask you, I know you said it was a pretty calm experience with you guys, and I would say that, you and your sisters being nurses of all things, that's interesting how that became a family line of work.
Yeah.
But I also think in many ways, that probably prepped you guys in a lot of ways for this situation, just because of the nature of the work that you did.
Yes, yes. So when my mom died years back, I was in just adult surgical nursing, which you don't see a lot of death. You do not see a lot of death. And my mom was dying of heart failure and lung failure. And I had a friend, and this is in the was it in the 90s? Mom died. Yeah, the 90s. Internet's pretty limited. I would just run down to other hospital departments, and I had a couple friends, and I'll remember Martha. And I'm like, Martha, mom's doing this. Martha, mom's doing that. What do we do next? What do we do next? And she'd be like, do this, call this person, and the problem with when my mom was dying is she did not have what I want to call a cooperative doctor. They hadn't been a great doctor for her for a couple years, and I had begged her to switch to a different one that I knew. And finally, when she was about 6 months prior to dying, she switched to this other doctor, and life changing, just life changing. That doctor got her on more medicine to take care of her symptoms, got her helped us get equipment at home. And this is 1996. So this is in a more rural area. It was not as more modern hospice is now, but we had a home care nurse able to come. We had we just had all the support that you would with hospice for the most part. I don't remember chaplain or social work so much, or, but she did have bath aids and things like that. So mom's experience was our training ground for my dad. Trust me on the grief, and we could just go to that spot. I'll tell you what the hardest thing for me is that anticipatory grief. Mom is going to die. She's been giving a life-limiting diagnosis, and I'm afraid of my feelings. That's literally what I consider anticipatory grief, and maybe you could clarify, but I was just literally afraid of these future feelings of life without mom. How am I going to be without mom? How is anything going to happen? I was really close to both my parents, and it was hard. I was able to, with my dad, not have that anticipatory grief that was so intense. And fortunately, because I'd gone through such a loss with mom, that I was able to go, okay, I know it's coming. I know it's coming. I don't like it. Dad was also giving that life limiting illness season of 6 weeks or I think it was 2 months, and he went in 6 weeks. So I take that back. Dad went 6 weeks from the diagnosis of cancer, not 6 weeks from when the doctor said. I think he might have had a little bit longer per the doctor, and he died sooner. So, and that happens. That's a guessing game too. That's a whole different guessing game. How long will somebody last? There's a lot of things that we can go, okay, they're not doing this, they're not doing that, but every so often, you got a lot of people that are coming off the side, and they just boop, they're good.
Yeah, that's the thing that I learned through my own experience with my grandfather's. The doctor said he had 12 months to live, and he lived over 2.5 years.
Yeah.
I mean, I
Yeah.
don't know how, but I'm really glad you brought that up, by the way, because that's something that a lot of people get very fixated on when they hear about cancer diagnosis
Yeah.
or, heart condition, things like that. And, to your point, I just want to reiterate, because it's a beautiful way to say it. It's just that those are all estimates. We don't really know
Right.
when that's
Right.
going to happen. And some people leave sooner, some people leave later.
Yeah.
It's just we only really can base that off of a statistical data of what we've seen in the previous past with people. Um,
Correct.
and I loved how you talked about anticipatory grief, because that's something that has not really gotten brought up a lot on my show. So I'm really glad you shared your feelings on that, because I do think that in a lot of ways, when we do get faced with that end of life situation with somebody, we're in that anticipatory of like, okay, well, we know this is going to happen, but we don't know when, we don't know how. It could happen in 6 weeks, it could happen in a year. We don't know when. And then on top of that, like you said, you were very close to your mom, you were very close to
Mm-hmm.
dad. And
Yep.
when we're very close to somebody, there's a lot of emotions that go on there. And we have all those thoughts of like, well, how's life going to be without them? Or how am I going to navigate this? Or,
Yep.
what's it going to be like for them? We go through this cycle spin of questions and our
Mm-hmm.
emotions. And
Yeah.
um, I think one of the hardest things for people that I've watched, especially people I've coached, is leading up to that person's loss. It's almost like you're grounded in a sense, but you have a lot of questions and a lot of kind of what ifs, if you will. And then when that person
Mm.
goes, it just hits like a freight train, and all the emotions and feelings pour out. And
Oh yeah.
it's a very hard place for people to process that emotion and give themselves space just to understand how they feel.
Well, I had a recent guest, and it's the death denying culture we live in. We don't even seem to talk about it. My mom, because she was older when she had me, she was like, Marie, this is what's going to happen. This is what's going to happen. This is what I want you to do. And she educated me on, unfortunately, that her death, and it happened when I was just 30 years old. And I still feel like I was really young to lose my mom at age 30. My husband was in his 50s before he lost a parent. And, my siblings were in their 50s. And it's kind of like I got to have my parents all to myself, but yet I didn't have them as many years. There's variables. And I lost what I was going to say. I totally lost. So sorry. Um,
No, no, that's okay. You brought up a question when you get done. I was gonna ask
okay.
you.
Well, lost. I totally had I was like rambled. I just went side. I apologize. We'll just go ahead and ask the question. It'll come
No,
back.
that's fine. I love raw podcasts for this purpose, because we're all human and we're all
True
trying to
story.
process our thoughts.
Yeah.
Um, you brought up the death denying culture. I wrote that down as you talked about it. That's the first time I've heard that, but it's a very accurate description of death in America, by the way. We've are
Yep.
I was very shocked when I went through losing my grandfather because everything seemed to happen so fast. It's
Hmm.
almost like, he passed away at home, which I was very grateful for that. I was grateful to be there for him. I can say that today, not 5 years ago.
Right.
But also, the funeral home comes, they pick up the body, they leave, they go to the funeral home. They're
Yeah.
asking you all these questions about how you want to deal with this, how you want to process this. Here's what things cost, and I feel like so much gets flown at you, and the death denying culture, though, I think really does play an impact role in this process because we deny it so much, because we try to hide so many aspects of this process that almost in a way it leaves us unprepared to really know how to deal with this and process it. And I think I love that you said your mom sat down with you at 30 years old and had that conversation with you. I can't imagine that was an easy conversation, but it
Oh,
was.
it was way before I was 30. I was a teenager and she would cry. I just hope I make it till you're 16. And you'd be like, what are you talking about? At six, at 14, you're like, what are you talking about? And then she'd cry, I hope I make it till you're 18. I mean, she did that every so often. She would just have this conversation. And so, no, when I was little, and my mom was the funeral food for all the funerals at our church. So she would get a phone call and then she would call 20 people and say, can you bring this? Can you bring this? And so it was that. And now I had to go with her, of course, to all these funerals and
Hmm.
help her prepare the food. So I was definitely involved in what was going on. And it was kind of like, it was just something because it happened from young age. It was something that was normal for me. And not that I wanted it to be normal, but the true story is everybody has somebody that's going to die in their family. Everybody dies. Every single person is going to die. And when you deny that, you're robbing yourself of being prepared in a better way. So, like my parents, they had purchased a place to be buried in. They had told me, I want this, I want that, I want you to have this, I want you to have that. My aunt was really good at that. I talked about that in the podcast. She had pictures of, for example, a nightstand. Who wants it? And she had seven, or excuse me, she had seven kids, but six were living. And so they had a little note system. They could say, I want this, this, and this. And then they all kind of went through and figured out who got what. So think things that you have to think about. Who's going to get what? People need to do their wills. People need to do power of attorneys. I mean, we could go for another hour talking about just the basics of preparations.
Well, what would you say contributes the most to this death denying culture? Because in my own experience, I feel like on the medical side of things, doctors want to prolong life as
They
best they
do.
can, which makes sense, by the way. We all want to prolong it,
Right.
but also at the same time, there are cases that it's just going to happen faster. There's nothing we can do
Yes.
about it. We can't give you enough medicine, do
Mm-mm.
enough medical thing. It's just not going to prolong life, and it's going to create a less quality of life. Well, what would you say are the biggest factors you've seen that contribute to that idea within the death culture?
I work in the medical industry and I don't want to be negative towards the medical industry, but I do feel like in my trailer for Hospice Explained, my niece's husband went to PA school, and I say niece's husband. He's closer to my age than my nieces, and we're because my siblings were older. My nieces were born when I was young, so that's why I will refer to him that way. But anyway, he went to PA school. One lecture on end of life. One. So you think of a medical school, you think of nursing school, you think of all of our education. You're gonna have one lecture, one 2-hour lecture on end of life. We're not trained, none of us. PAs, doctors, nurses, none of us are getting trained on end of life unless that's our field of focus, unless you're going into palliative medicine, unless you're going into certain medicines. Yes, they get trained on what it looks like, but the goal is to keep you alive. That is a doctor's goal. That is my goal as a nurse, is to keep you alive. It's not, when you go to hospice, it's a 360. You're going to switch into comfort mode. You're going to switch into easing the symptoms for a peaceful passing. And so you asked earlier when I went to hospice, yeah, 100% life, life, life at the hospital. And then you go to hospice and you're suddenly going, how can we make them comfortable as they die? So we're not in the medical world and we're, there's a medical place every corner, right? Nowadays in urban areas, there are a lot of hospitals. They're big business, but they're not, they're, everybody do everything. What does most people say when when they're given choices? Do you want us to do everything or do you want us to let grandma go? Oh, no, do everything. Now, did you ever talk to grandma? Does grandma want her chest crushed? CPR is um, I have to be always careful, but it can be a violent, because you're compressing these bones and to get grandma's heart, and she has osteoporosis, and you compress those bones and bones will break. And
Mm,
that is not comfortable to survive. I had one hospice patient who had gone through CPR, and that patient said, "Don't touch me. Do not." He says that I'm having more trouble recovering from CPR than I am from his, whatever kind of cancer he was going through and the pain from that. So that
mm,
is a certain experience. And do we have a lot of people? Do I have a lot of people to talk about that? No, but I do know that there are times that CPR is right and good and works. Don't get me wrong. There is, that athlete, perfect example, that athlete that went down on the football field and they were able to do excellent, good CPR, and that athlete recovered. There are plenty of reasons, near drownings, etc. There's plenty of times for CPR. But when you're faced with end of life, you really need to talk about that before you just decide to do CPR, because CPR, when the life is naturally ending, is is going to be very ineffective, because what are you getting if the heart and lungs are already failing and you do CPR? Well, you're not going to do anything but have to send this person to the hospital. They're going to be intubated, sedated so they don't pull out that intubation tube, and they're going to lose full consciousness because they're going to have to the sedation, they're just going to go to sleep. They're not going to be with you to say I love you and goodbye. And then that's just not the same kind of end of life experience that you might have at home. When grandpa was at home, you at least get to say I love you, and remember that time you took me fishing? That was the best time. When the fishing pole went across the lake because I dropped it, and you know whatever, you can have that stuff. And that's what we got with my parents by having them both at a home. My sister's home for mom and my home for dad. And we just had, I remember 15 people in my bonus room around dad's bed. And the dying patients can get pretty quiet, but we're just chatting away. And it's can be some of your, I remember with my mother-in-law and father-in-law, both same thing. We were all sitting at the table chatting or going into the rooms, and you take turns, and I had some of my best visits, when people are dying, because it opens up different discussions. It really does. You could just look at your kids and say, I prefer this. I don't want that. It's great opportunities to educate. And I'm going to pause and say an experience that I had with hospice. It was one of my first ones. I was still new and I was orienting. And we went to a house to admit somebody. And this house was full of people, just like you expect. But great grandma was upstairs in her own room, and she was probably 48 hours, I think, from dying. And myself and the other admit nurse were like, uh-oh. And the person's daughter also had her grandkids there and her daughters. And she goes, I do not want the grandkids knowing grandma's sick. I don't want them. She pretty much brought us in the back door and go out the back door, and don't tell these kids. We've kind of talked about this a little earlier. Don't tell these kids that grandma's dying. And we've robbed those kids of knowing the natural process of life. They don't know people die. They don't see it, they don't experience it. How do you process your feelings and your grief?
I'm really glad you shared that story because that's exactly what happened to me as a kid when I lost my great grandma that I was really, really close to. And I still to this day don't really fully understand what happened at the end of her life. And all I knew was I got told that grandma's not here anymore. And you're always left with these, as a child, you're left in these questions of like, well, I don't understand that. Like, where did grandma go? Like,
Right.
what happened? Um, and I do agree with you. I think that as much as that's hard for children of any age to go through that process, I do think that not hiding that from them and giving them the opportunity to understand that. And, I will say, and I will preface, because I've seen stuff in hospitals that I would think would be very traumatizing to a child
Yeah,
with certain passings. I'll say that. But that's, again, up to everybody else to decide. They're not my kids.
right.
But I do think that teaching your kids and understanding that this is a part of life and it's going to happen. We're all going to die. And some people have a peaceful death, as you brought up. Other people have a very violent death. And the things that I've learned in my own journey is that we don't get to pick when we're born and we don't get to pick when we die. And that's just, it's a part of life that we have to accept as much as it's painful and as much as sitting in that anticipatory grief, really wondering what is this going to be like? How's this going to feel? How am I going to feel about this? How's my life going to change? We end up in so many questions and quandaries in that grief process, and I think that we're just not taught how to walk through that process to
Mm-mm.
even understand our emotions, understand how we feel. So a lot of people, and I'm sure you can attest to this, and I wanted to ask it since you've been in hospice. Do you see a big difference in people that go through that anticipatory grief, and then once that death happens, they almost seem like a different person, in the way they show their emotions?
That is one piece where as a hospice nurse, we don't tend to see the folks afterwards. Some of the different departments did, chaplain, social worker, they might have seen the families after. Every so often you would have another experience with somebody or you see them somewhere sometime else, but I personally did not get that specific follow-up. Something I would have liked, but the reality is what every so often you would get a like a for example, the chaplain would say, "Hey, I spoke to so and so, and they just said, they're doing great, and they just wanted everybody to know how much we thank them and what a good experience we had," or something like that. So sometimes you get follow up, but unfortunately, I wish I got more. I wish I got more.
Yeah, I've always been curious because with my family in particular, people were very haughty right before my grandfather passed. There was a lot of anger, a lot of finger pointing, a lot of blame.
Oh yeah.
And unfortunately, on the after side of that, by the way, that got even
Mm,
worse.
that's too
And
bad.
so I try to share with people, I've talked to people out there that've had the opposite experience. I've had people say that prior to that person leaving, there's lots of love and care and kindness
Hmm.
and understanding and acceptance. And that doesn't mean, by the way, and I say it in my coaching practice, that acceptance doesn't mean we like it and we agree to it and we're fine. That is the
Correct.
complete opposite of
Correct.
that. Acceptance just means that we're going to take this for what it is, not what we think it is. And
Yeah.
when we live in that place, we can live in a place of empathy and compassion and understanding. And that's a place where we can actually process our feelings and emotions with that. And we can say things like, I'm not angry or pissed, but that I feel really sad. I'm very upset that this person in my life, grandparent, father,
Hmm.
mom, is not going to be in my life anymore. I feel very
Yeah.
confused. How am I going to navigate this process? And so I think as we give more attention and light to hospice care and what that really means and end of life processes and really start, taking away the hidden veils of this thing and say, this is a part of life. Yes, it's not pretty. It's not
Right.
fun. That here's what this looks like and how it works. And so we can understand it, and really make that process a unique part of our life.
One thing that is not as commonly known about hospice is they do have bereavement care for 13 months. It's part of the whole package. So you can do depends on, but you can get a phone call, you can get they send cards. I know I used to sign cards. They but they can help people through that grief process. Not everybody's aware of it, and I talk about this. This is my probably my easiest part. I tell. So when I think it was my father-in-law, no, it was probably my mother-in-law when she died. I remember talking to the chaplain because I was the contact person, of course, for the family. And the chaplain's like, "How are you doing?" And I'm like, "Listen, you need to help other people. I know how busy you are." And I'm thinking, I just poo pooed right off my own feelings because I'm so worried about everybody else. So that's just a great reminder. You have to, no matter how active you are in whatever role you're doing for someone's end of life or past, you still have to take care of your own emotions and your own feelings and your own grief. And that's hard. I was just like, oh, busy staff, please go help somebody else. And I regret it. I regret that not kind of taking care of it, because I was taking care of my husband and his family and my kids, and so I was taking care of everybody, but but me. So,
Um, I'm really glad you brought that up because that's a big part of the grief process that
mm,
also, by the way, is very unspoken. And I watch people a lot of times trying to take care of other people when they haven't even taken care of themselves. And I
right.
always use that analogy of they tell you on airplanes, put your mask on first before you help other
Yep.
people.
Yep.
I really feel like grief and end of life in particular, when you're not working through those emotions of your own, holding space for yourself is the way I'll phrase that.
Yes. Yes.
When you're always trying to help other people and taking care of this, your mind is always going 1,000 miles an hour. But that thing becomes this really big buildup, and
Mm-hmm.
it's going to pop at some point, whether that's after or before, it's going to happen. What are some ways that you would recommend to people to better understand and process their emotions in that moment, to hold space for themselves?
That's a good question. That's a good question. So I think for me, it helps to know what's going on, really. Everybody's got a different way, and I like the knowledge. This is what's going to happen. This is how it's going to look. And I remember when we talked about your grandfather, you didn't know what it was going to look like, and it wasn't quite, you know, pretty or, knowing as many different possibilities for me. And I think that's helped me as unfortunately, as you age and go through more experiences. What is, I think, I hate to say this, but I'm going to go ahead and say this. Like grief is unfortunately not not your friend because you've walked with grief in many ways, right? We all go through grief. Whether grief is because you got embarrassed in 6th grade because of something, you still might be sad about it. You might, I wish I was able to say XYZ, or, there's different things we grieve. Death is that big one. That death is that big one. People grieve lost relationships, whether it was a situation where they're no longer with somebody, but they're alive, right? We always seem to have often things we're grieving. Maybe you're grieving that you're still working and not retired, or you're retired and you wish you were working. There could be many different griefs. And I think as you talk your literal words as an acceptance coach, we have to find the place to accept where we're at and accept that that's the right place for us. And acceptance is huge, isn't it?
It really is, and it is not an easy thing. I tell
Mm-mm.
people.
No.
I've shared people on my own grief journey, and I can sure you can attest on the many roads you've been on that that does not happen in the first hour, the first day, the
Mm-mm.
first week, sometimes not
No.
even the first month after that goes on, because you're experiencing so many emotions. And I can tell from what you've shared about your stories today about losing your father, losing your mom, those are very, very hard losses.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't
Huge.
lost a parent yet, so I can't really relate to that in that
Nope.
sense, but. Um, I'm just guessing that that had to have been a very, very hard moment. That was not going to be something that was just, I accept it today. That was a process to work to get there. Um,
100%. 100%.
and now it's back to your point too about holding space for yourself. Like you said,
Yeah.
you spent time, always trying to take care of other people and trying to make sure they've got support. But, Marie's important too.
Yeah.
Marie's got feelings just like they do. Um,
Right?
and giving yourself that own space.
Mm. Yeah, I recognized it as a podcaster, and I recognized it when I was speaking to different people. One of my guests was a death doula, and they can be like somebody that's a whole nother, um, they're non-medical usually. Some of them are nurses. So the death doula can be like your own private person you hire, and you can hire them to come in when you're in the hospital. And so a dying patient can hire them, or a family can hire them, and they're like your own person just to focus on comfort. Some focus on grieving, some focus on just the physical being there present for the actual death, and just creating that. that safe space for the family, and they can educate, they can do so many different things. And like I said, a lot of them focus on different things, but this particular one that I was interviewing was helps people with grief. And I was able to, just in that moment, it was like, and you're interviewing, it's like, yeah, I really didn't do a good job. I could have done better for myself. My only worry was my husband and kids, for example, when his mom died, or, those are my worries. And wasn't that true of any parent? Or, you might be worried about other people.
I think that's a normal part of the
Yeah.
process, by the way, because we're all humans. We thrive on connection, but we also don't want to
Yes.
see other people hurt. That's a big thing
No.
I've noticed. We don't want to see other people suffer in the ways we've suffered. And I think in a lot of ways, our experiences, just like you've gone through, like I've gone through, we've taken those grief experiences and we've done something in our careers or our life
Yeah.
patterns that we can work through that grief process or even honor that situation. I
Yeah.
wanted to ask you because another question that comes up in the grief coaching for me is honoring a loss and celebrating someone's life. I wanted to ask you about that side on your
Mm.
own grief journey. What are some ways that you found to celebrate your mom and your dad that you lost? What were some ways that that looked like after they had passed?
Interesting. My mom had a phrase. She had, I want my flowers while I'm alive. So I don't go to my mom's grave. I've gone there a couple times,
Mm.
and my dad's grave the two. Be be the person they want while they're alive. If I had to give, and that's because both parents were like, I don't care if you go visit me there. I don't care how you do that. So inside, right here, I can tell you, because I gave my mom flowers, because I told her you're a good mom. I told dad, I love you. You're the best dad. Tell them what you think. Tell them how you feel. Be the child that you should be. If it means, yeah, I used to go, um, my dad lived near one of my other sisters. And every other Saturday, I'd work one Saturday, and the other Saturday, I'd pack all the three kids up. My husband was usually working, and I'd go visit dad. You just be that person, go visit them, go make them important to you. Be that person when they're alive. So when, even when mom died, I struggled through grief, but I didn't struggle through the fact that I didn't tell her how I felt. I, same with dad. I remember telling my dad, 48 hours before he died, I was just the last person putting him to bed. And I said, Daddy, I'm going to miss you. I'm going to cry saying that. I just looked at him. I said, Daddy, I'm going to miss you. And, I'd said it, and I did. Yeah, I miss my parents both. They were good
Yeah.
people. I want to be that good person too. That's another thing. You think about it. I want to honor the people I love now. I don't want to wait and honor them past. I can honor them every day by, for example, my mom was a hostess. I love to host people. Be that hostess. That's how I honor my mom today. Be helpful. My dad was a helpful person. If somebody needed help, my dad would stop and help them. So that's who I am today. That's how I honor, for example, my parents. I'm sorry that you got me on
And
that one.
I didn't mean to make you emotional on that one.
That's
I just
okay.
it's something I've found that people that go through grief when they're able to honor those that have lost that they're very
Yeah.
close with. And I think that a lot of people don't understand too about grief. And I love that you just shared that story about your mom, by the way, that she wanted flowers while she's alive, not after
Yep.
she's gone.
Nope.
That one made me laugh a little bit because I felt like your
It's
mom had some
okay.
humor with that one.
But she wasn't funny.
So,
She had a very big sense of humor. She had a very dry humor. She just would say things really dry, and you're like, is that supposed to be funny? And then you're like later, oh my gosh, that was hysterical. But yeah,
well,
and I'm the same way. I want my flowers now.
yeah. I hear you with that one. And I love the way you describe that you celebrate both of them
Yeah.
because that's a big part that, I do try to encourage people working in the grief space is, you have to find ways to honor and celebrate that person's life. And for me, that's going sailing. I honor my grandfather that
Yeah.
way or going
Yeah.
hiking. And it can
There you
be
go.
something simple like that. And even for you, being a hostess because your mom was a hostess, just
Yeah.
continuing to carry that legacy of what they taught you or things you liked about them. And catching
Hang
on to
on.
your mom's humor.
Yeah, I'm going to show you something. I have it right by my desk. Talk about honoring. So this is my you can't it's the family calendar. And
Oh,
I put a I missed one, but there is just this moment, and that's another way I'm gonna honor my parents is because I work on keeping my siblings and all their kids and grandkids, and I make sure everybody. So this is just my parents. So it's just our little family tree, and I make that calendar and I send that out to everybody. So that's another something I do to, honor my parents and, honor the whole family.
I love that idea. I have never thought you could do that, by the way. I didn't know that existed. So I'm gonna
Oh,
add that
yeah.
to my list of things to do because that's a
This
great
was
way to remind you of them throughout the year.
Yeah. It used to be a lot cheaper. Costco did them, and now Costco went out to Shutterfly, so it's not
Mm.
quite as cost effective, but if you do it earlier in the year, and you can start it any month, and I just usually pile it in, September, October, and everybody knows send me pictures. And if you don't, you may have some repeats coming in because I have now, of course, t probably 15 years of calendars, maybe more, and like it's like tomorrow is my mom's birthday, and two great grandkids were born on her birthday. So, it's wonderful.
That's amazing. I
Yeah,
appreciate you sharing that. And happy
yeah,
birthday to your mom. Happy heavenly
exactly.
birthday.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, Maria, I wanted to ask you, it's been such an honor having you on the podcast today. It's been such a beautiful story to hear about your mom and your dad and your just the losses of experiences you've gone through with grief. I think you've shed a lot of light on the end of life process and that it doesn't have to be this big mysterious thing that we don't really
No,
talk about and don't know about. You've made it feel very okay today to ask these questions and talk comfortably about grief and end of life. And I'm looking forward to sharing this episode with everybody because
thank you.
you're really opening the door to a very closed off topic that we should feel comfortable talking about.
It is a closed off topic. You're right. And that's part of my mission is to just make it safe to talk about. I mean, you're safe with me if people want to talk about it. And my goal is to just help providers too. That's my future goal is to help providers talk to their patients, because I feel like that's still something that's missing is people knowing that the end might be coming, and you want to warn people, right? Hey, you might only have a few months with this person, so, let's be honest. That's probably the biggest thing is be honest with your loved ones and providers to their patients to let them know this might be how much time is left. And we don't know. We don't have a tattoo
We
expiration tattoo. So,
don't have an expiration date on ourselves.
no, no, definitely not.
Yes. Well, Marie, as I wrap up the podcast, I usually ask my guests two questions. One of them is if you were to run into somebody who is currently going through grief or maybe feels stuck in grief, what's one or two things you might share with them that could help them navigate that just a little bit easier?
So, this is hard to even talk about. I have a niece that died in a car accident, and her birthday is my mom's birthday. So thinking about her a lot this week. Grief is yours. Grief is yours. It's it's not anybody else's, and how you're experiencing it is okay. So like sometimes you ask a patient how they're doing when I call my patients and they're like, "How are you doing today?" You know, this happened, but it's okay. People say that very quickly, don't they? It's okay. You know, so and so died, but it's okay. No, it's not okay. It happened to you. I'm sorry it happened to you, but it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to say today is not a good day. Today is the day that I'm thinking about my niece and my nephew who lost their daughter, my sister who lost her granddaughter. You know, their birthdays were all this week, and I sent them something because I said, this is just a hard week. And I can't say just forget about it. I just say, I am grieving with you, is what I say. because I'm missing my niece who would have been 21. Her name was Catherine. I, sorry, Chris.
That
This is just
you don't
owning
owe me
it.
apologies, Marie. There's
So
no apologies on this show.
I think owning grief, owning it, it's sad. And this particular one is really sad because it was not, there was, for my niece Catherine, it was an accident. There was no drinking, drugs, nothing, but it was an accident. And she succumbed to the injuries about 14 months after the accident. And it was a hard 14 months. And it's just hard. We miss her dearly. We miss her. And so being okay that you're in grief, being okay that you're sad, I think just you have to, if you can accept your own sadness, then maybe you can walk through it better. That's probably what I would say. I don't know that it's never going to be there. It's never not going to be there. Every year I see pictures of, everybody that's died in this calendar. I mean, not everybody that's died, but any month might have somebody's birthday, one of my brothers, and I still miss both my brothers. And we bring their names up, talk about them. We don't shy away from that. If Jerry was here, he would be laughing about this, and if Les was here, he would be like, "Where's my second dessert?" Or we just have to. We laugh a lot in our family. We try to laugh, and just enjoy the fact that maybe they're not here, but we wish they were, and we miss them. Sorry, let's take a drink.
You're You're totally fine. Marie, I want to say thank you for sharing that about grief. That was a lot of people need to hear what you just said in the last 5 minutes because we're all told not to feel those things, or we're told, oh, that makes me uncomfortable the way I don't know how to respond to this right now. So just kind of do that on your own. And I wish more people would just hold space. If anybody's watching this on YouTube right now, watch as I sat here quietly and gave Marie the space to share that story about her niece. Just gave space for that.
Yeah.
Because if you do run into somebody who is going through grief, by the way, or is struggling with grief, that is the best thing you could do for them is just hold space. You don't have to fill the void because it's uncomfortable. You don't need to be uncomfortable, by the way. It's not your experience, it's their experience. So let them have that experience in the way they need to have it. It doesn't need to be controlled or contained or
Mm-mm.
any of things like that. Just let it be because you will find as you watch, as you guys know, you follow the Empower Grief Journey. We learn through these conversations of what Marie just shared with us right here, right now, was a real example of how we handle grief. And I just want to say thank you, Marie, for being uh,
Thank you.
vulnerable and open enough to share that part of your life with us today.
Yeah, I feel it is very vulnerable, and thank you. Appreciate that.
So I wanted to ask you as well before we wrap up, if people want to connect with you and on top of that, more importantly, find your podcast, where can we find you?
I am minimally on YouTube because I am mostly an audio podcast, but it's called Hospice Explained, just a real basic. And hospice, I am Marie, Marie, at hospiceexplained.com if you wanted to email me. And in addition, I have a website that needs to be updated, but it's hospiceexplained.com.
Well, I'll be sharing that website link to your podcast
Thank
in the
you.
show notes on my show. And I do recommend to my listeners, reach out and listen to Marie's podcast. She has a lot of great information on there, great stories. And I also want to congratulate you, by the way, 154
Thank
episodes
you.
in. That is
Thank you.
incredible.
Thank
Um,
you.
I just got to episode 54 last week, so I got a little ways to go to catch up with you.
Oh, it doesn't it goes by pretty fast. I'm surprised. So surprised.
Well, Well, I just want to say a big, big thank you to you for coming on my show today and sharing your grief story, your healing journeys, and also your knowledge of hospice that is very under talked about and very
Yeah.
closed off. You shed some light on an area of life that we all are going to face. I don't care where you live at, what you do for anything. We're all going to face this. And so to have somebody like you that's open enough to share those aspects that are hidden with all of us to make this an easy conversation was a big, big gift today. So I just want to say thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me, Chris. I'm honored. Thank you so much.
Well, I want to also thank our listeners for joining Marie and I today on this episode of the Empower Grief Journey podcast. If this resonated with you, Please share this story with somebody you know who could benefit from Marie's story. For more episodes that are designed to empower you and support you during your grief journey, visit empowergriefjourney.com and subscribe to this podcast. You can also find this podcast on Apple and Spotify. The Empower Grief Journey is all about honoring your journey and embracing your emotions and finding strength in your own time. You're never alone on this journey, and together we can navigate with grief with courage and compassion. Until next time, be kind to yourself and take your grief journey one step at a time.